The fire spoke more than the man ever did. In the high pine ridges, where the snow kept its silence long after spring, he lived without a name anyone dared speak. Not because he was feared, but because people sensed they would never truly understand him, and perhaps that scared them more. They called him the Apache giant, not in cruelty, but in awe. 6.5 feet tall, shoulders broad as fence beams, hands thick with calluses and memory. He moved slowly, not out of laziness, but with the weight of someone who'd learned that sudden things in life, gunshots, screams, betrayal, rarely led to anything worth remembering. His name was Tohain, but no one had called him that in years. The cabin sat at the edge of the timberline, its porch crooked, its roof layered in cedar moss. A wolf dog lay under the steps, white and scarred, lifting its head only to the scent of danger. Inside, the fire always burned low, and Tohain carved in silence. Not idols, not weapons, but animals, delicate birds, sleeping deer, even a rabbit with one ear bent backward, as if caught in wind. He rarely kept them. Sometimes he buried them in the snow. Other times, he'd set one near the frozen creek or at the base of a tree and walk away. There were no women, no children, no mirrors in his home. Only silence. Only the fire. He'd once known laughter long ago, before war came with blue coats and red laws, before settlers cut roads through his homeland like knives across deer hide, before his brother was taken in the middle of night, accused of stealing a horse he'd raised from foal, before his betrothed, a girl with hair like river grass and a voice like flutes, had vanished in winter and was never found whole again. He remembered her only when he closed his eyes. He'd stopped doing that too. So he carved. He hunted. He stitched his own leather. When spring came, he planted herbs. When summer passed, he stored meat in salt. His life was clean, predictable, earned through discipline. And beneath that, sorrow bloomed like a rootless weed, silent but strong. One evening, as snow whispered down in threads too thin to see, Tohain heard something strange. Not wolves, not wind. It was a sound like a breath caught in the throat of the forest, soft, almost prayerful. He stood from the fire, took only his knife. The dog rose too, not growling, just alert. Through the trees, the snowfall thickened, blurring the horizon into white mist. A shape stumbled forward, then another, then a third. Human. Barely. He stepped down from his porch. 3 figures collapsed near the split-rail fence. All women. Young. Their dresses were torn by branches. One limped and held her thigh as if bleeding. Another held the third by the waist, dragging her gently, lips blue with cold. All of them barefoot, their hands red and raw. Their bonnets were long gone. One girl still clutched a cloth doll pressed against her ribs. Tohain said nothing. The girls didn't scream. They didn't beg. The one in the center, the one without visible wounds, looked up at him, trembling not from cold, but shame. Her eyes were not fearful. They were tired, as if they'd been old for a long time. Behind him, the fire cracked. Tohain stepped aside and pushed the cabin door open, then turned his back, walking inside. It took them time, but they followed. He did not offer words. He did not ask questions. He fed them broth with strips of smoked rabbit and poured water from a chipped tin pitcher. One of the girls, she must have been the eldest, refused to eat at first. Pride. Tohain respected it, but slid the bowl closer to her. The youngest cried softly into her sleeve. The middle one, the one who had met his gaze, watched him more than she watched the fire. After the food, the girls collapsed by the hearth, knees tucked to chests, heads resting on each other's shoulders. They did not speak to him. He did not speak to them. The dog circled once, then lay between them like a sentry. That night, Tohain sat in his chair, carving a hawk from a piece of juniper. He watched them through the reflection of the flame. Something in the way they curled together reminded him of mourning doves after a storm. The snow did not stop for 3 days. Each morning, he woke before light, built a fire, boiled water, laid bread on the table, wrapped in a cloth to keep it warm. The girls remained silent. They moved like shadows, like people who'd learned it was safer not to take up space. On the 3rd night, as the moon glowed faint behind a veil of cloud, one of the girls stood. It was the middle one. She walked barefoot to where he sat near the door, slowly, like someone unsure if her weight was welcome. "Armela," she said. He did not answer. She sat anyway, legs folded, gaze on the wolf dog's ears. "You're not going to ask us anything," she whispered. Still, he did not speak. She looked at his hands. "You carve animals." He continued the shape of a bear cub's ear, blade gliding gently. "Why?" The fire cracked again. Finally, his voice emerged, low as riverbed stone. "So my hands remember gentler things." She flinched at the poetry of it. Then she nodded and rose. That night, the fire burned brighter. The next morning, the girls tried to work. Mela carried water. The eldest, Elda, he learned, stacked wood until her shoulders shook. The youngest, Faye, tried to sweep but ended up just sitting with the dog, braiding its tail. Tohain said nothing, but for the first time in years, his tea tasted different, less bitter. The fourth night, he placed 3 carved animals by their bedside, a bird for Elda, a fox for Faye, and for Mela, a wolf pup with curious eyes. She tucked it under her pillow and smiled at him as she lay down. Tohain turned his face toward the fire before she could see what it did to him. By the end of the week, the girls had made the cabin feel less like a shelter, more like a breath. Elda found a cracked mirror in the pantry and placed it on the table. Mela embroidered a cloth for the windows. Faye, though still limping, laughed more now than she winced. And still, Tohain said almost nothing. But he fixed a loose porch board Elda kept tripping over. He boiled willow bark for Faye's swollen ankle. And he left a new carved rabbit on Mela's windowsill, wrapped in a bit of velvet he hadn't touched in years. Then, one morning, the snow stopped. The world turned blue and white under sun. Tracks led to the edge of his land. Rider tracks. One set. He followed them with his eyes, not his feet. That evening, Mela asked quietly, "Are we safe here?" Tohain paused from carving, then nodded once. She didn't press further. But the silence between them that night felt less like distance and more like understanding. Later, after the girls slept, Tohain stood on the porch. He looked at the sky. The stars were out, soft, unbothered. He thought of the time before the fire took his heart. He thought of the way Mela had looked at him, like a woman who saw a man, not a memory. He thought of her hands, calloused yet tender. The wind rustled the pine. The wolf dog sat beside him, nose twitching at the scent of something distant. Then a sound broke through the trees. Hooves. Distant. Returning. Tohain's jaw set. He stepped back inside, sat beside the fire, and began carving again. Not an animal this time, but something unfamiliar. It would take shape as the danger grew closer. But for now, he watched the flame dance. Let it speak, and listen for what tomorrow might bring. The snow softened, but the air remained cold. In the days that followed, silence stitched its way through every motion, every bowl passed, every glance not returned. The girls had not given their names. Tohain had not asked. He understood that survival made people hide things, even who they were. They rose before full light, braided their hair near the hearth, and split tasks without instruction. Faye, the youngest, still limped. She kept close to the wolf dog, scratching behind its ears and whispering things to it when she thought no one was listening. Her cheeks were plump but pale, and her eyes darted like she expected someone to snatch her from behind. Elda, the eldest, moved with a clenched spine. She wiped every surface twice, even the windows, though it was too cold to keep them open. She seemed to scrub not just dirt but shame. Her sleeves stayed rolled, even when her arms turned red from the wind outside. Mela, the middle one, watched the world with quiet precision. She counted the firewood. She noted how long the tea took to boil. She folded Tohain's shirts when he left them on the line, and once placed a sprig of pine in the vase beside his shaving bowl. They did not sit idly. They did not whine. They stitched their place into his life like careful thread, not changing the fabric, just making it warmer. Tohain said little, as always. He moved around them like the smoke from his own chimney, present, shaping everything, but asking for nothing. But when Faye burned her hand on the stove, he crossed the room in 4 steps and took her hand in his, without a word. He crushed leaves from a wooden box, mixed it with snow, and wrapped it in cloth. Don't speak, Elda hissed at Faye, her voice sharp with fear. But Tohain only nodded and handed the wrap gently. That night, Mela watched him from her corner. She didn't smile, but she didn't stop watching. By the fourth day, the girls began to share pieces of themselves, not as stories, but as fragments dropped in casual murmurs. Faye laughed once while watching the dog chase its tail and said, "Pa never let us keep dogs. Said they were filthy." Elda, after a long silence, added, "He didn't like anything that had teeth." Mela said nothing, but her fingers tightened around the piece of embroidery she was stitching. Later that evening, she hung that cloth in the small square window above the kitchen basin. It was a single pine tree with 3 branches, stitched in dull green. She never explained it. Tohain never asked. The cold was softening. Outside, ice cracked from tree limbs. The creek made sounds again, small gurgles, like whispers returning to a throat after too long in silence. Tohain began hunting further out. Rabbits mostly. A small buck once. The girls would watch him skin the animal without flinching. Even Faye, young as she was, held the hide steady once when Elda couldn't. Mela, more than once, left fresh herbs by his bowl before he returned. She didn't tell the others, but he knew. Once he returned to find her standing at the edge of the porch, her hair in a loose braid. She wasn't waiting for him, but she hadn't gone back inside either. "You always walk like you're carrying something," she murmured as he passed. He stopped. "I mean," she continued, softer now, "like grief's still tied to your back." He turned, eyes calm. "You don't." She held his gaze. "I did, until it got heavy enough to crush my breath." He said nothing, but she understood. Some things weren't meant to be solved in a single sentence. Later that night, Elda whispered, "Don't get foolish with your heart, Mela. That's how they got us here." Mela whispered back, "He isn't like them." Elda's voice sharpened. "No, he's quieter. That's worse." The days followed with rhythms now. Tohain would wake before light, pour water into the iron basin for them to wash, leave one carved thing each day. A feather, a squirrel, a small bear, and say almost nothing. But he listened. He always listened. One morning, a shadow passed across the girls' faces. All 3 had gone still as the wind. A distant bell had rung. The sound echoed from the valley, low and cruel. It was a wagon bell. Tohain watched them flinch. "Someone you know?" he asked, voice calm. Faye shook her head too quickly. Elda said no, but Mela's voice was the truest. "Yes." He waited. She stepped forward, chin high. "Uncle Jeb. He's not blood, just paper folk. Took us after my past. Said we owed him. Said settler girls had better use than cooking." Tohain's brow darkened. "He tried to sell us," she whispered. Elda grabbed her arm. "Enough." Mela pulled free. "No. He needs to know. We ran. He chased. We hid in a river trench. We walked barefoot 5 miles. Faye almost died." Tohain stepped back toward the fire, picked up his carving knife. Not to threaten, just to ground himself. "Why come this far?" he asked. Mela's eyes didn't waver. "Because no one lives this far." The next morning, the bell didn't ring again, but the fear stayed, like smoke trapped in blankets. That night, Tohain went out to the creek with the wolf dog. He took nothing but the knife and a torch. The moon was a pale coin above. He returned at dawn, face unreadable. No one asked where he'd gone, but a crow's feather was left near the girl's door, black and shining, untouched. Something had changed in the way Elda looked at him after that. She brought him tea the next day. Didn't thank him. Just sat across the room while it steeped and said, "If I see that man again, I'll kill him myself." Tohain nodded. That was all. Later that week, Faye found the strength to walk to the edge of the field. She laughed and spun once, her limp nearly gone. She picked wild sage and brought it back. "I want to hang this by the window," she said. "Why?" Mela asked. Faye shrugged. "Smells like not being afraid." When the snow finally broke enough for the creek to flow, Elda asked what the plans were. Her tone was clipped. "We can't stay here forever," she muttered, though her hands lingered on the folded linen by the stove. Mela looked at Tohain. "Do we have to leave?" Tohain didn't look up from his carving. Do you want to? Mela's answer came after a beat. No. Elda said nothing. That night, Mela stepped onto the porch again. She found him there, sitting on the rail, watching the horizon. His jaw looked carved from stone in moonlight. Thank you, she whispered. He turned. For not asking, she said. Some men, when they offer shelter, expect payment. His expression didn't change, but the muscles in his shoulder eased. I offer warmth, he said, because I remember what cold does to people. She stepped closer, slowly, not to touch him, just to be near. You were in love once, she said softly. Tohain didn't blink. I still am. Her breath caught, not from hurt, but the weight of his truth. That's why you never look away when I speak, she said. You see ghosts in every word. He looked at her then, really looked. And you, he asked. She stared at the stars. I see fire in every kindness, and wait for it to burn me. They stayed like that for a long time. No touching, no promises, just breath and silence and the knowledge that both had been ruined before, and maybe didn't need to be again. The next morning, Elda found a carving on the windowsill. It was a woman, with her arms crossed, head tilted. It looked just like her. She didn't say anything, but she placed it beside her folded clothes and never moved it again. That evening, Faye declared she would cook. The stew was too salty. She grinned through it anyway. Later, they all sat outside, wrapped in quilts. The stars came early that night. So did the calm. Tohain watched them from his corner of the porch. Elda leaned her head on the post. Faye fell asleep humming. Mela whispered into the wind. We never told you our names that first night. Tohain didn't reply, but he carved them into his memory, like a totem. One letter at a time. That was enough for now. But the hooves were coming. Even the wind could feel it. And soon, silence wouldn't be enough. When the snow began to melt into the soil, it did so shyly, like a girl returning to a place that once hurt her. The thaw was gentle at first. Tiny rivulets formed along the tree roots. Steam rose from sun-warmed rocks. And inside the cabin, something else was loosening, the silence between them. Faye no longer limped. She ran now barefoot, wild in the half-melted fields, trailing a stick behind her like it was a ribbon. Her laughter, once timid and secret, now broke across the valley like birdsong in morning fog. Elda no longer scrubbed every surface twice. She still worked hard. She always would. But her motions had lost their edge. Her anger didn't vanish. It became precise. She carved soap from tallow, stitched tighter seams, mended shoes with neat rows. Control had returned, but it no longer came from fear. It came from knowing she still had power to protect. And Mela softened without fading. She moved through the home, like someone who had once been invisible, but now chose when to be seen. She sat beside Tohain during long evenings, close enough to feel his breath when he exhaled, but never close enough to touch. She began to hum softly when hanging laundry. Her fingers danced through water, not just out of habit, but for the feeling. She was falling in love, not in a girlish way, with hearts and swoons and flutters. No, she was falling in the way spring fell, slow and unafraid, certain that the frost would break eventually. Tohain changed too, though no one would have said it aloud. He moved slower when Mela was nearby. He took longer to clean his rifle. He began carving larger pieces, an owl with open wings, a doe turning her head. More detail, more care. He noticed when Faye's braid came undone and gently guided it back behind her ear. He refilled Elda's tea without being asked. He left a ribbon on the porch rail for Mela, tied in a knot only she would understand. He never asked for anything, but something about the way he looked at her when she didn't notice, how his eyes lingered just a second too long on her hands. Her laughter, the rhythm of her breath, betrayed what he felt. They never kissed, but in that cabin, every gesture was a vow. One day, word came from the valley. The town was planning a barn gathering for the first day of thaw. A dance, a market, bread, boots, and music. Faye begged to go, just to see people, she pleaded, to remember what it's like. Elda bristled, to be looked at again like a bargain, like meat. Faye's face fell. Not if we walk in proud. Tohain said nothing, but his expression tightened. Mela studied him. "You don't want us to go?" His reply was soft. "That place didn't protect you before." "Maybe it will now," Faye argued. Elda scoffed. "Places don't change. People do." "I want to walk like I'm not broken anymore," Mela whispered. "Even just for an hour." Tohain looked at her then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them, a silent knowing that even strength needs testing sometimes. He stood, stepped into the shadows of the loft, and returned with a wooden box. Inside, under a square of faded cloth, were 3 delicate necklaces, woven from pine fibers and copper thread. He handed them out one by one, for when you need reminding who you are. They left at noon the next day, dressed in borrowed warmth and fire in their chests. Tohain stood by the porch as they disappeared beyond the ridge. The wolf dog whined once. He waited until dusk to move. In town, the celebration was already echoing through the main road. Fiddle strings, boot heels on wood, voices raised too high from drink and sugar. Faye danced first. Elda stood near the doors, eyes sharp. Mela lingered between them, watching, smiling wary. At first, no one noticed them. But then came the stares. And then the whispers. It didn't take long. "You see them girls?" A man muttered near the punch. "Ain't they the ones that ran off? Thought they was dead." Another chimed in. "Looking a little too fine to be mourned." And another. "Bet they got stories to sell." Faye shrank near the back wall. Elda crossed her arms and blocked a man's approach with a glare. Mela tried to laugh, tried to breathe. But then came him. Jeb, uncle by law, poison by soul. He grabbed Mela by the elbow, pulling her toward the barn door. "Well, look what the snow dragged in." "Let go," she said low. But he was smiling, teeth too close. "You forget whose name you ran from." Tohain had been right. Places don't protect. People do. She yanked her arm, but he only tightened. "You always was the proud one, weren't ya?" A crowd formed, but no one intervened. Mela was pulled into shadow, where the lanterns didn't reach. She struggled, bit his hand. He slapped her. The crack echoed, and then she ran. Out the side door. Through the dusk. Into the brittle trees. She didn't stop until her legs gave. Until blood smeared her lip, and her knees burned, and the pine needles cut through her stockings. She walked the last mile alone. And when she reached the cabin, she did not knock. She sat on the porch, curled into herself, ashamed, not because of what was done, but because her heart still wished someone had stopped it. The fire inside flickered through the windows. She did not go in. She stayed until morning, when the frost had touched her lashes and her dress clung wet to her calves. Then the door creaked. Tohain stood there, wrapped in a deerskin cloak, eyes fixed on her in silence. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He stepped forward, knelt, and gently lifted her, like a man retrieving something sacred. Inside, he bathed her cuts without words. He made tea she wouldn't drink. He set her necklace back in her palm. She dropped it somewhere, and he'd found it. And when she finally spoke, just one word, "Sorry," he shook his head. "You returned," he whispered. "That's all." Later, when the other 2 girls returned, red-eyed and silent, he gave no lecture, no questions. He simply moved his axe beside the door and stared out the window. The wolf dog whined again. Something was coming. Something always was. But for now, inside that cabin, a woman rested in a man's home and felt, for the first time, like maybe she wasn't just safe. Maybe she was seen. The morning was so still, even the crows hadn't dared to cry. He stood at the porch's edge, the door behind him creaking with warmth. The valley below stretched in a hush too wide to trust. Tohain held her in his arms, not as a rescue, not as a possession, but as if cradling something already broken, something that had fallen too far to catch itself. Mela didn't speak. Her breath ghosted against his chest, warm then fading. Her hair was tangled, her lips split, the copper of dried blood catching the dawn's light. He carried her like silence carries grief, without fanfare, without stumbling. One step at a time, boots pressing into thawed earth as though marking the end of something sacred. Inside, the girls watched him from the hearth. Elda rose first, fists clenched, lips trembling. Faye didn't speak. She couldn't. He laid Mela on the cot, pulled the thickest quilt over her, then sat beside her and rested a single hand atop her wrist. I followed her trail, he said, voice low as coals. There was blood. She's not talking, Faye whispered. She will. Elda stood by the window, staring out toward the town with eyes that had lost all softness. He was there. That man. Jeb. I saw him. Tohei nodded. She didn't cry, Elda said suddenly, voice cracking. She didn't even yell. She just walked, like she'd gone back to being no one. Tohei stood, hands clenched. That night, he didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He whittled something that looked like a broken crown and placed it near the fire. Then he walked outside and sat beneath the moon, legs crossed like he was praying. The wolf dog sat beside him, silent, ears alert. In the morning, he rose before the sun and saddled his horse without speaking. Faye woke to the sound of leather tightening and went outside barefoot. You're going to the town. Tohei nodded once. You'll kill him. He looked down at her, small, afraid, no longer limping. I won't let anyone else carry that weight, he said. Faye reached out and clutched the edge of his coat. Please come back. He rode away like mist. Quiet, steady, not a war drum, not a storm. But he was coming. The town hadn't changed. Shutters still creaked. Horses still snorted beside water troughs. Men still leaned too far into their whiskey before noon. But when Tohei rode in, even the horses grew still. No one spoke as he tied his reins outside the saloon. His steps were slow, deliberate, as if every stride weighed as much as his own history. Inside, men turned halfway from their drinks. No one met his eyes. The piano player went quiet. Then Jeb turned. He was laughing, mouth open wide, until he saw the man standing in the doorway. You got something to say, he slurred. Tohei stepped forward. You laid hands on someone who was under my roof. Jeb straightened, feigned confidence. She's my blood. My problem. You don't speak for her. I don't speak for her, Tohei said, his voice so calm it stung. I speak for what she is now, not yours. The room tensed. Jeb stepped forward, hand drifting toward the pistol at his side. But Tohei didn't flinch. You draw that, he said, and you'll never touch another woman with those hands. Jeb froze. No one laughed. Outside, more townsfolk had gathered. Whispers moved like smoke. Apache's here. Something's happened. Jeb swallowed. You leave this valley by sundown, Tohei said. If you're still here when the stars come out, I will bury you with your boots on. Jeb looked around, expecting anyone, to back him. No one moved. Not the sheriff. Not the storekeeper. Not even the drunk at the bar. Something had changed. Tohei turned his back and walked out, his shoulders like stone. He didn't ride fast. He let the world breathe behind him. At home, Mela stirred. She woke with her mouth dry and her chest hollow. The cot creaked beneath her. The fire had burned low. Faye was at her side. Elda sat by the window again, sharpening a blade. When the door opened, the girls didn't look, until Mela lifted her head. He stepped in, taller than the threshold, hat in hand. She saw it in his eyes before he said anything. The man was gone, and he hadn't become cruel to do it. She tried to sit, but her ribs ached. He walked to her, knelt, took her hand gently, then offered her something in his palm. A necklace. Hers. But different. This one had a small carved heart at the center. Not perfect. Not polished. Rough at the edges. Like her. She reached for it, eyes full. But before she could speak, he said, I didn't stop him for justice. I stopped him because you should never have had to carry that shame. Her throat closed. He helped her tie it behind her neck. And when his hands lingered, she leaned her forehead into his chest. Outside, the wind had warmed. That night, she sat beside him at the fire again. This time, her shoulder touched his, and he didn't move away. Later that week, they walked to the far edge of the creek, where the first green shoots had begun to rise. She knelt in the soil, fingers tracing the new life. He crouched beside her. You plant anything here? She asked. He shook his head. Why not? I never thought anything would stay. She turned to him, her braid brushing his arm. "You're wrong." Her hands dug into the dirt, burying the past one seed at a time. She planted sage, lavender, thyme. He brought water in his hat and poured it gently over the roots. Elda watched from the porch, arms crossed, but her expression soft. Face slept curled on the dog's side, mouth parted in peace. Spring came slower in the valley, but it came. And one morning, when birds returned and smoke from the chimney drifted sideways, Mela stepped out in a new dress, hand-stitched, simple, clean. Tohane stood at the fence, mending it. She crossed the yard without shoes. When he looked up, she said, "It's time." He didn't ask what for. He only nodded. That evening, under a sky bruised pink with dusk, the four of them stood beside the cabin while Faye scattered petals, and Elda held a dried flower crown. Mela took Tohane's hand in both of hers. They said no vows, only held each other's eyes. She whispered, "No man ever carried me like I was whole." He replied, "You've always been whole." And in that stillness, surrounded by pine, blood, and rebirth, they became something stronger than survival. They became home. The final snow melted that night, and when the stars came, none of them hid anymore.